Welcome back, America. Hugh at Inside the Beltway. Admiral Mark Montgomery, Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery, is retired from the United States Navy. He helped helm the Cyber Solarium 1.0. Now it's back at 2.0. He is also Senior Director at the Foundation for Defense of Democracy. Good morning, Admiral. Happy Thanksgiving week to you. We're muted.
Good morning to you too, Hugh. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Admiral, I want to talk to you primarily about Ukraine this morning. I don't know what President-elect Trump has planned. He has not yet named a special envoy. Might be Rick Grinnell, might be Robert O'Brien. Is there a deal to be had? And if so, how do we get to it?
Hugh, there is a deal to be had. And look, and I say this as someone who really thinks we need to support Ukraine to the maximum and put pressure on Putin. So I think the deal to be had, could be pulled right out of the art of the deal. And the idea in the art of the deal is that you deal from a position of strength. So I think if we spend a couple months putting significant pressure on President Putin, pressure that hasn't been put on him by the Biden administration, that President Trump will be in a great position 3 or 4 months from now to call up Vladimir Putin and say, hey, Vladimir, how did you appreciate me giving full weapons expansion to the Ukrainians? How did you appreciate me continuing assistance, maybe as a loan, not a grant? How did you appreciate me putting pressure on the Europeans to carry their load? And then most importantly, how did you appreciate me bringing economic pressure on you through actual sanctions on the shadow fleet, drilling and leasing in the United States so that Russia's economy begins to really suffer. Russia's oil and natural gas based economy begins to really suffer under U.S. pressure. Once all that pressure's on, I think the best deal maker is going to get a good deal from Vladimir Putin, and that's the only way.
Now, I was in conversation yesterday at church with a foreign correspondent who tells me all the sound and fury about the ATACMS being allowed to be used in Russia doesn't really amount to much in the eyes of the Russians because there are only 56 ATACMS in Ukraine, medium-range missile, 150 miles, something like that, not really unleashing Ukraine against Russia. What do you make of the Biden administration's last-minute efforts to unleash the Ukrainian ability to strike at the Russian energy infrastructure?
Well, if I was generous, I would say they're starting that maximum pressure campaign for President Trump. If I was less generous, I would say they're worried about their legacy of being seen as someone who provided weapon systems, but with such restrictions that we were really just allowing Ukraine to play for a tie. In other words, we weren't giving them the kind of weapons and authorizations necessary to take full measure of those weapon systems. And so ATACMS, it's too late in terms of being able to hit the concentrated Russian areas that were close to the Ukrainian border, logistics, ammunition, airfields, troop concentration areas. The Russians have moved back beyond what they consider the likely range of the ATACMS when released. And so a lot of that opportunity was lost, but I think they're trying to kind of like cement for legacy that they did this. And it's really unfortunate that they waited to after, I think they waited for the election for political reasons. And, in the end, when you do things like that, you imperil your allies and partners.
Admiral, I'm also pro-Ukraine and want independence to remain there and want to be a realist about how to get this done. In your mind, having studied it extensively, what is the realistic scenario that sees an end to what is basically World War I in the 21st century?
Well, it's not going to be easy, and I think I spent, as I mentioned to you previously, I spent a few weeks there training their general officers on kind of joint planning operations, things like that, and they're just finally getting to use the F-16s. In fact, one of the pilots, American pilots, and he said they're using the F-16s as MiG-16 still. I mean, they really haven't fully gotten that together. They haven't figured out how to integrate air and ground operations the way the United States forces were. If they're given enough time here, a few months to get that, they will be able to bring a lot more pressure at the point of the conflict. But I have to tell you, Hugh, the thing that's killing them is artillery. And this is where the North Koreans really have played a big role. I know we all concentrate on their 11,000 troops, but their 11,000 troops aren't the big deal here. It's the 5 million rounds of artillery of all kinds of sizes that they've provided the Russians. That's decades of U.S. production have been provided by North Korea to Russia. As a result, the kind of ingoing, outgoing still sits at 7 or 8 to 1 in terms of artillery rounds between Russia and Ukraine. So to really change things, They're going to need to be able to conduct kind of the offensive operations that move artillery back, that allow their forces a little bit of room for maneuver. So, do I think there's an opportunity? Yes, and really the opportunity is to get Russia on their back foot, so that someone can come in with a deal for Vladimir Putin that's one that he can choke down, as opposed to one that he imposes on Zelensky.
So, Admiral, how important is it that the Ukrainians hold on to their salient into Russia? Because no one saw that coming, but now I read reports that that's where the North Koreans are going to combine with Russian forces to push Ukraine back into Ukraine. What is your understanding of that salient?
Yeah. So I think if the negotiations very soon, then holding on to the salient has value. But if the negotiations really at the end of the summer, a lot of other things will play out in here to give the Ukrainians some leverage. I think the one thing they need to make sure they do is don't lose their really high quality forces that are in that Kursk area, because they use some of their best forces to create that salient, and they really are not in a position personnel wise to lose a significant amount of forces in Kursk. So at some point they've got to make an operational decision on that. I mean, right now there's value in it. There may not be value in it 3, 4, 5 months from now.
So, Admiral, it seems pretty clear to me, but I'm a civilian, that we have an alliance of our enemies, Russia, North Korea, Iran, and of course China. China's buying Russia's oil. North Korea is sending ammunition and men. Iran is sending oil and the drones that it makes. Is this a de facto alliance of evil here? Because it does seem that way to me. I'm not a strategist, not a military guy, but some things are pretty obvious, and this looks pretty obvious to me.
Hugh, you're exactly right. I mean, Ukraine is at war with 4 countries for the exact reason you said. Israel is starting to see North Korean equipment show up with Hezbollah. We're seeing the Houthis, trying to get anti-ship cruise missiles from China and Russia. The Houthis, another Iranian or proxy organization. What we're seeing is our adversaries are fighting together. It may have started out very transactional, but they're developing these relationships economically and security wise. And that's who we're confronting. And we and our Western allies have to understand that. So when we tell our Western allies that they need to be careful with their trade and their technology transfer with China, they need to listen to us. When we were, the Israelis have certainly backed off any perception that China or Russia can be a neutral player with them. Each of our allies and partners needs to understand we are fighting a cabal of 4, authoritarian states who are absolutely willing to share technology, equipment, personnel, and economic support.
Now, Admiral, I want to play for you and then come back and get your assessment. Admiral Paparo went to Brookings recently and gave his details on what the PLA is doing vis-a-vis Taiwan. Let's listen to cut number 1.
Over the summer, I saw the most rehearsal and the most joint exercises from the People's Republic of China that I'd ever seen. With the widest geography, the jointest operations for air, missile, maritime power that I'd seen over an entire career of being an observer. And this included, on one particular day, 152 vessels at sea, including 3/4 of the amphibious force, 200 combat amphibious shapes in the water. I'd seen 43 brigades, including breaching obstacles, onward movement to military operations in urban terrain. We saw also 2 demonstrations of military power in response to the Taiwan inauguration on May 20th, and then once again on 10/10, Taiwan National Day, as it's so called.
So, Admiral Montgomery, I'm kind of surprised to hear Admiral Paparo speak that bluntly. Are you?
No, because I know Sam and he's a blunt speaker. I think one of the things he didn't say there, but he would normally say is, he war games these things a lot, and he still thinks the United States has an advantage. I war game these things a lot playing him, and I think we still have military advantages. But let's not shy away from what he was saying there. They are absolutely trying to meet, Chairman Xi's guidance to be able to invade the island by 2027. Now, we're doing things that are making it harder for them to win in that invasion. But don't be mistaken. The Chinese investment over the last 25 years has been brilliant, and they have gone from a military that could do almost nothing during this last Taiwan Straits crisis when we sailed 2 aircraft carriers in the vicinity of Taiwan to today where they can push us back beyond the first island chain and muster up the forces to do a cross-strait invasion. I still don't think they can win, but I think that they can put a lot of pressure on us and force us to make very hard decisions that end up with a significant number of U.S. casualties when we push them back.
So, Admiral, how does Ukraine connect to China, connect to Israel? Would you explain it for the Steelers fans who are listening? We're being nice to them because Pennsylvania helped Trump win, but we nevertheless make it Steeler friendly.
Thanks. I thought we were being nice to him over Thursday night, but okay. So we have to be at this point, whether you supported us going into Ukraine or not on February, supporting Ukraine with treasure, not blood, in February of 2022, whether you supported that or not, 2 years into it, you can't back out versus an authoritarian. The lesson the authoritarian will lose is the same lesson they learned watching us chaotically withdraw from Afghanistan, was that the United States is not a reliable ally. The United States will cut and run at the wrong time if we're not careful, if pressured. And so the lesson Putin will learn when he deals with Georgia, Moldova, or eventually the Baltic states is I can keep pushing and the United States will eventually back down. What China will learn is we can push on Taiwan and the United States won't step forward. Iran, will try the same with Israel. I think they'll find a bit of a viper in Israel, but and again, North Korea with South Korea. So all of these authoritarian states are studying us closely. Part of deterrence is that there has to be a credible belief you'll use your capability and capacity. And if we're not even willing to support Ukraine with just treasure, no blood, that's going to be a bad signal to give to 4 authoritarian, rapacious leaders.
I am back for a short segment with Admiral Mark Montgomery. Rear Admiral Montgomery is retired United States Navy, one of the most well-respected defense authorities in the United States. Admiral, what does Donald Trump need to do in the appointment of a Secretary of the Navy, a DepSec of the Navy, acquisition people at the Navy, and does he have to direct Russ Vought to up the Pentagon's budget, but shift it more to the Navy and away from the Army?
Thanks. You brought up the last point you brought up is the first point, really, which is that it doesn't matter who he appoints if there's insufficient resources. And look, we don't talk about this enough. Under the Obama administration, defense spending as a percentage of gross domestic product, which is an important number because that's the number, that's what it costs to produce things in the United States, fell from 4.5% to 3.1% at the end of the Obama administration. Under the first Trump administration, it grew back to 3.4%. It's now decayed back down to 3.1% and almost 3%. And I believe if we'd had a future President Harris, it would have gone down to 2.9 or 2.7% over time. He has to actually increase it. He has to work with Senator Wicker, the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, and Representative Rogers, the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, to raise our defense spending up. I think a reasonable amount is 0.1% of GDP a year. So that's about 28 trillion GDP. That's about 30 billion a year, each year increase, but every year. You can't take breaks. And that'll get us back up to 3.4, 3.5 at the end of Trump 47. If you don't do that, it doesn't matter who the secretary is. Once you do that, you got to take a good chunk of that money and give it to the Navy. You got to take a smaller chunk of that money and give it to the Air Force. But those two services, the services that have to procure expensive long-term things, need to actually make the investment in things that are slightly more expensive. F-35 type planes and its replacement are expensive. More importantly, ships are expensive, and they take a consistent investment. And when you have a larger budget, you can do multi-year ship buys. Congress has allowed that. You can do multi-year plane buys. Congress has allowed that. And we're starting to allow multi-year munition buys. As a new secretary does that and prioritizes the right things for Taiwan, if they have enough money, then they can get it done. But you have to have the resources. Then you have to have good leadership. Then you have to have a good assessment and prioritization of what's needed. When those things all come together, you end up with John Layman and in the 600 ship Navy or whatever.
So let me ask you, Admiral, does the aircraft carrier figure in the longer range budget as opposed to, say, the Columbia boomer class, more Virginia attack submarines, submersibles that aren't manned? Is it time to start thinking about the carriers that we have are all the carriers we're going to get?
I do. I still do, and I say this as a surface warfare officer who's hurt every time when we buy carriers. The budget of the ships that I commanded are usually hurt, but I recognize they're needed. They are the way we impose cost. We do need to be smarter about long range strike. My friend Captain Jerry Hendricks, retired, has written extensively on the need for better long range strike from those carriers. Probably unmanned strike in a lot of cases. We need a better mix of that, but a carrier is part of it. A Columbia class is part of the strategic thing, a strategic response, and of course, Virginia class are of value. But I would tell you something, Hugh. We are not going to get Virginia class at a fast rate anytime soon, even with all the investments Senator Wicker's pushed their way over the last 2 years.
Wow. Okay, I hope Russ Vought is listening. I hope Russ Vought is listening, and I hope that Michael Waltz is listening, and they go to the speaker and they go to incoming Majority Leader Thune and say, we need a budget that's realistic, and we can do that in the budget resolution. Admiral Montgomery, always good to see you. Admiral, be well. Come back soon as this transition takes shape. I want to hear what you think about the budget number that comes out in the budget resolution. Thank you, Admiral.
Thank you, Hugh.